AMT's Mack R600 kit has been around for almost 50 years, first being released to the market in the mid-70s. Follow along as I take a look at the hood in this next few videos, and we'll look at some ways to make the kit parts even better and address some minor inaccuracies. Ejector pin marks are common on almost any injection molded part, and these are highlighted in blue. The red circles are the kit-provided locations for the fender-mounted turn signal lights, and this is one of the first inaccuracies that we can correct. When I built this model about 12 years ago, I mounted the turn signal lights as per the instructions, which puts them on the flat part of the fender and a little bit too far inboard. Searching online and in books, all the Mack R model pictures I could find showed the fender-mounted turn signal mounted further outboard on the rounded corner of the fender. This outboard location of the turn signal light on the rounded corner of the fender shows up really well in this picture. I'll cover installation of the turn signal itself in a future part of the video series. For now, the first step is to fill the existing hole, which I did with a pair of styrene discs punched with 20 thou material and glued in place. The real truck hoods are made of fiberglass, and the texture on the inside surface is much rougher than on the exterior, as can be seen in this picture. Using a 732 carbide bit with the motor tool set to low speed, sand down the plugs, remove the ejector pin marks, and gently run the tool over all the inside surfaces of the fender to create a slightly roughened, fiberglass appearing texture. This is a similar technique to what many armor modelers use to create cast metal surfaces, and it works just as well to represent fiberglass. On some of the smaller inside corners, where a 732 diameter bit is a little bit too large, I use a 1/8 diameter carbide bit. The inner fender liners have 3 ejector pin marks highlighted in pencil here. Fill these with styrene discs, and use the same technique with the carbide burr and the motor tool to sand the ejector pin marks smooth and create fiberglass texture. This fiberglass texture is a subtle detail, but it is noticeable, as can be seen by comparing the unmodified part at the top with the textured piece on the bottom. Another minor inaccuracy is the molded in location for the side marker light, highlighted in red here. Compare its location on the kit part with a side marker light location on a real truck. This is easy to deal with simply by sanding off the molded in detail and mounting the marker light in the correct location during final assembly. Just like the injection molded bodies in car kits, the Mack R600 hood has mold parting lines on it, which must be removed for a more realistic appearance. I've highlighted the parting lines in red on this example hood, and a few minutes of careful sanding time spent at this stage will greatly enhance the appearance of the finished model. At the back corner of each fender, there are a pair of heavier lines visible, which are not mold parting lines, but actually represent fender ridges, which are visible on some real-life Mack trucks. I've highlighted the ridge in blue here, and it shows quite well on J&F number 111, which is a truck I actually drove 30 years ago, back in 1994. The fender ridge also shows up on this dump truck. What trucks and what years are fitted with this ridge is unknown. I'm also not sure if this is an aftermarket hood or a stock Mack feature in certain model years. Ultimately, it comes down to matching the truck that you're choosing to model. And if the truck you're building does not have the fender ridge, it's easy to remove with some careful chisel blade work to do the initial rough cutting, followed by sanding stick and hand sandpaper work to smooth out the fender contours, being careful to preserve the raised lip around the edge of the wheel opening. The last item we'll look at in this installment are the molded on hood hinge bolts, which, as supplied in the kit, are not inaccurate, but are different on different model years of real-life Mack trucks. The kit has a 7-bolt pattern, which matches the bolt pattern for the hood hinges on this truck, which show up very well with the silver paint. And also on this truck, which again has a 7-bolt pattern. This truck is also a pre-73, identifiable by the straight cab wall with a fairly narrow section showing between the door and the back of the cab. This style is often referred to as either a flat back or a steel dash cab, and was replaced in 1973 with the +3 cab that used the same doors and added 3 inches behind the door line for added room inside the cab. The extra 3 inches is quite visible in the side view, and this is also a truck that has the fender ridges. And one more picture of a truck with a 7-bolt hood hinge pattern, and this one's also equipped with a hood scoop for the tip turbine charge air cooler installation. The other hood hinge bolt pattern seen on Mack R600s is the 4-bolt pattern seen on this example hood. Typically, this seems to be fitted to newer trucks, but this is a pre-73, identifiable by the small cab grab handle and has the flat back cab, but it also has the 4-bolt hood hinge. Mack parts are interchangeable, much like Harley's, and these may have been retrofitted with a newer hood on an older truck. With the kit part, to model a 4-bolt hood hinge pattern, there are 2 options. The simplest one is to tape off the top 4 bolts and then sand off the bottom 3. This is not completely correct because the 4 bolts are mounted higher than they would be on the real truck, but it is convincing enough for model purposes. For comparison, note the location of the 4 molded in kit bolts. Then look at where the bolts are on the real Mack truck hood. The 4 bolts are mounted slightly lower, and the outboard bottom bolt is slightly closer to the outside corners of the hood than the one above it. Another option is to remove all of the molded on detail and use 60 thou diameter styrene rivet heads to represent the bolts. I located the first, outboard bolt, near the corner where the tapered area below the headlight opening is visible. Then the other 3 bolts were located, holes were drilled, and the rivet heads were glued in place. The 60 thou diameter rivet heads project a little bit more than the relatively flat carriage bolts on the real truck, so some sanding was done to reduce the domed profile of the rivet heads and to make them look more like a carriage bolt. The final step was a wash of Testors liquid cement over the bolt heads to blend them into the hood. With fiberglass texture on the underside of the hood and molded on details addressed on the outside, we'll conclude this installment. Thanks for watching, and when we come back for part 2, we'll start adding details to the underside of the hood, and we'll address the incorrectly molded radiator shutters.